when I'm not a professional? How do I design when I'm not a professional? That is tough. That can quite literally be $1 million question. It's similar to the discussion of how do I create this when I'm not a programmer? Or how do I get this thing going when this isn't connected to my profession? One of the best ways to do, of course, is to partner with people. I've done lots of videos about partnering, as well as signing contracts with folks over at bringingworth.tv. Feel free to go through the archives. We've talked about it quite a bit. Another thing is to actually hire people for that specific thing. And that hiring could be you give them a flat amount of money, say, okay, I'll give you X amount of dollars. Here you go. Or you give them a certain amount of equity or a piece of whatever you're building. Okay, why don't you go ahead and design stuff for me or create things for me or program things for me? And then I'll give you 5% of the company. So that means that if the company were to be acquired, or if you were to get acquired means exiting, that means it was bought from somebody else. We'll talk about that in the final episode of the series. Or if you were to get investment, then they would own a piece of it and then their value would go up. So you're essentially sharing the wealth. What usually happens is that for companies that have a whole lot of money, or if you happen to have personally have a whole lot of money that you can invest into this, bless you if you do, then it will usually end up being a financial payout to say, hey, can you design this or can you program this for me or build this for me? Here's, I don't know, let's say $1,000. If you end up being cash poor, which doesn't mean you're poor, but you're cash poor, in other words, your cash flow has to go somewhere else, then it's usually a piece of the company. With the companies that I have built, it was one where it was just myself, so there's nothing to share. And then my second company called Cuddler, I worked with two co-founders. They had actually already started to build the company, and I joined in a little bit later. And then we ended up divvying up the percentage of the company based on the work that we were doing, as far as how we contributed, so forth and so on. I was essentially the COO, so the creative chief operating officer. I'm so used to the creative world. Chief operating officer, and I was also the CMO, the chief marketing officer. So I helped launch the app as well as do a lot of the day-to-day stuff, which again I talked about extensively in the complete Bringworth collection, specifically in the ultimate bite-sized entrepreneur. So my role dictated how much of a percentage we end up doing. So when we got acquired about a year after we launched, then that check that came to our respective bank accounts, that was based on percentages that we did. So if you're going to be working with someone else, often there's two options: to give them a flat financial fee or to go ahead and give them a piece of the company. And actually, there's a smaller third option. And the third option is actually doing a barter where there might be stuff that they want to get done with their business or in regards to them, as far as, like, let's say that they're an amazing artist, but they don't know how to launch a business or how to launch their product. And let's say you know how to launch a product, but you're not a great artist. Then you two could barter, and then there's no financial exchange at all. So there's different ways to do it, but the most common way would be giving a piece of the company or giving some type of flat fee. For the folks that have worked with me, shout to Beck Loss. Her name is BECLOSS. You can look her up online. She's actually been my cover designer for this book, as well as that book, and a lot of my independent books that I've done over the past 10 years. And so we end up working from a flat fee standpoint. And that works for us. It works for both of us. So finding out the dynamic makes perfect sense. It also requires, most importantly, a level of honesty. My father, shout out to him, he's an artist. He's fantastic as far as drawing and graphic arts and all that. I got some of his genes, obviously, but mine turn into words. I'm good with words. I'm decent with language. I'm captivated by communication, but I couldn't draw my way out of a paper bag. And so I know that I would need to, when I started doing my books, I would need to hire a designer like Beck Loss. Shout to Beck. Otherwise, if I'm saying I can do it all myself, and then you see one of my cover arts, you'd be like, what's wrong with Damon's book? I'm not going to buy his book. And so you have to know what your strengths are. So in this case, we're talking about designers, but it could be something else. It could be programming. I'm a decent programmer, but I'm far from the best. It could be marketing. It could be writing, as far as the language, as far as when you're launching things. So keep that in mind and finding out what your weakness is. We can talk about this more in a future episode. Give a shout in the comments if you know where your weakness are. Weakness is ours. I know what ours. Weakness is. I'd love to hear, as well as what your strengths are. Again, I don't mind being transparent about that. And to be honest, if it's not a strength of yours, maybe you can find someone you can collaborate with through the great network here on the channel. Specifically, and I'm talking about my own stuff, if you want to get into design, a good stepping point, if you're like, Damon, I'm not going to learn Photoshop. I couldn't Photoshop my way out of a paper bag. I don't know what to do, but I'm willing to learn. Canva is a great way to start, and they literally just launched, I think within the last year, might have been way more recent than that. They just launched an enterprise edition. Enterprise, if you ever see the word enterprise, enterprise means business. No pun intended. So they just launched a specific Canva. And if you've heard of Canva, let me back up a little bit. Canva essentially is like Photoshop, but simplified to the nth degree. It's been really popular. I have older relatives that are love it and use it, and they're making. I use Photoshop a lot, so that's where I do use design is with the thumbnails and other things that you might see things related to this program, and they're making stuff that looks way better than mine. But they're using something as simple as Canva. Canva is a what you see is what you get, or a WYSIWYG, as we'd say in the old school. So really straightforward. It shows you right here. You're doing the equivalent of PowerPoints with the dots. You see it blown up right there. Presentations. Looks like Jesus, the guy from Jesus and Mary. Looks like Jesus. And then, sorry, inside joke there. If you get the joke, then we're definitely friends. Then there's Sheets, which is similar to Excel, Microsoft Excel, photo editor, websites, etc., and videos. So I have my own video things that I use. Shout out to Adobe Premiere. That's what I started using recently, as well as InShot, which you used back in the day. You can use it for that. You can do some stuff with AI. I mean, it's a vibe, and it's really popular. See, and then we have Enterprise right there, right? And then you have different templates. Now, enterprise, they're talking about contact sales. You don't have to get that deep. You can also work within a different canvas right here, depending on the level that you're at. For me, I would be a Canva Pro, maybe go into a Canva Teams because I work with folks like Beck and other people that help my stuff shine. Fantastic application. If you haven't heard of it, definitely check it out. There's a special they have going on with Bring Your Worth TV, so be sure and click on it, and then you'll be able to learn what your special discount is. So shout out to them. If you're like Damon, no, you don't understand. I don't want to design anything. I don't want to design my product or my idea, but I don't want to do the website and all that stuff. I got you. Another program, which I think they're relatively new, but I just heard of them recently. They have reached out and I looked at their stuff. They have really interesting stuff. It's Design Pickle. Design Pickle. Love the name. And Design Pickle allows you to actually hire designers through this marketplace at levels. So I get some of this off there. There we go. Right. So you can go ahead and white label is a way to do it. White label means that someone's doing something behind the scenes, but they're doing it special for you, but it's private to the rest of the world. In other words, if you wanted them to design whatever you're working on, but for their name or the Design Pickle logo or whatever not to be on it, then they got you. That's the white label. Excuse me. And then you can break it down. The creative management platform, it's a fancy name for similar to a CMS. And CMS is what you would use at like a WordPress, or if you had a blog going back in the day. It's basically a management system for all the content that you have. They have the equivalent of that, but for your designs. So that's one. Second thing is designers on demand. So if you were like, I need a designer to do this at this deadline at this rate, they got you. there's someone that's going to come through and be able to support you on that. And then most importantly, flat rate design. Depending on what you negotiate with people that you're working with, they might get a percentage, which is another, I guess, another element here, but that rarely happens. But they might get a percentage of whatever you're creating. This happens way more in, say, the children's book industry, because with children's books, if you have kids or if you're the guardian of kids, you got nieces and nephews, you know the deal. If it's a children's book, there's probably going to be a ton of illustrations. So often, when it comes to children's books, the illustrator and the author share the royalties 50-50. If it's a really strong illustrator, it might even be a different type of arrangement where the author who wrote the book actually gets less. Of course, when you get to adult books, then you're not having as many images things unless you're talking about graphic novels. I digress. The flat rate design basically says you're guaranteed to pay X amount of dollars. You get that, and then you're able to move on with your business without having to have the complicated contracts. Again, Design Pickle has some good stuff going on. Be sure and check them out. And they do have some stuff going on with specifically BringYourWorth.tv. And I'd be remiss if I did this episode without talking about this. Real artist ship is wrong. What Steve Jobs meant. Um, Steve Jobs had a lot of issues. I was living in Silicon Valley. Actually, I've been in the same rooms with him. So I was around when he was around, right before he passed away. Rest in peace. And one of the things that people often quote him as saying is real artist shit, and which is true. In other words, if you don't have a product or a service or a thing that other people can actually enjoy or participate in, then you're not really doing what you're doing. He was a very black and white guy, and so a little bit extreme. I give some nuance to that and basically say, look, you also don't want to ship crap. You don't want to ship something that's going to disappoint folks. I don't want to send a book out, and have it at the bookstore or have you guys buy it from DamonBrown.net and then you guys are super disappointed with it. Like that's not. So you don't want to ship anything. But so many of us, which I think he was getting at, so many of us stop at the what's called the ideation stage. We have this idea in our head. Again, I've talked about this in previous episodes. I'll regularly run into people and they'll be talking about the same idea that they had ages ago, but they haven't moved an inch. It goes back to what I was talking about with the newsletter at the top of the show. Like, we have to find that balance between doing that quiet work and moving forward, even though we're not guaranteed to have that success or that time in the spotlight. But sometimes we're so eager to have that positive feedback and be like, oh, I want to ship it right now. That adrenaline, that serotonin kick that happens with it. And then we don't get it, and then we just stop. We quit. I don't want you to do that. That's one of the reasons why I do the work that I do with coaching. I don't want you to do that. So be sure and watch this episode because I think it'll help you if you're feeling stuck right now. As well as I mentioned it in this segment because sometimes we need the element or the little spice from another person or another organization to help us get over the hump. If I was waiting to ship a book until I was great at designing a cover, then you guys wouldn't have any of my books on your shelf at all. That doesn't make any sense. Instead, I partner with someone like Beck, shout out to Beck, or partner with someone else, and then they're able to do their part. I'm able to do my part, and I'm able to ship the books, including the, I don't know, 9 books I've done in the past 10 years. None of those books would have happened if I'd wait on me to become the best designer. Instead, you partner with other people or other organizations, and then they can level up your product or service. The fact is, I have this TV show, I have my own publishing company, I have my private coaching practice, I got other things that I'm doing that are almost 100% solo Damon, or I have a little bit of help from the outside. But all those things require some type of input from people outside of Damon. Not only does that keep your sanity, but also allows you to partner with people who can help your stuff really shine. What are the areas where you feel like you should be? What are the areas where you feel like you're strong at? Where do you feel like you should level up? And where are those areas where you should outsource it? Give it to somebody else. For me, it's design. You don't want something that's 100% designed by Damon. You really don't. At least as far as drawing, you don't want that. I've designed other things. I'm decent with my hands, but Drawing, that's not it. Maybe in 10 years, I'll be in a different place. But for right now, that's where I need the most support. You're watching Bring Your Worth TV. I'm entrepreneurial coach Damon Brown, here to help you as a side hustler, solopreneur, otherwise a non-traditional entrepreneur. I'm here live on Wednesdays at 1:11 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, Vegas time. You can subscribe for free. And today we are talking about, excuse me, making your product real. How do you make your product real? It's an important thing because if you don't have a real product, then what are you doing? How can you help?